I'm Peggy Pirro, and this is Food From Here, brought to you by Swerka and More and their intergenerational community garden project with Young and Established. Swerka and More works to improve the quality of life for seniors in southern Indiana by supporting independent living and helping reduce food insecurity in our community. Scot Mangold is the head chef at Old National Events Plaza, where he coordinates all the kitchen activities for the conventions and the shows there. He's also in charge of the monthly Dinner on the Bridge events, which are 5-course food and beverage pairings, typically featuring wine, but sometimes more unusual pairings like mead and bourbon. Scott grew up in Evansville. He took his time getting to the kitchen. He was one of the oldest students in his class when he went to culinary school at age 30. He spent the years before that playing in bands and working in restaurants, and even after culinary school, he went down a few unconventional paths, as you'll hear in our conversation. Before we get to that conversation, though, I'd like to ask you for help with an upcoming show. I'd love to know what you're cooking this summer and what you're eating. Do you have a garden? Do you forego cooking altogether and just get takeout all summer? Let me know. Send an email to foodfromhere@wnin.org with the subject line Summer Food and tell me what's on your plate these days. I'll share your thoughts and answer any questions in our next episode. That's foodfromhere@wnin.org, subject line Summer Food. And now, here's my conversation with Chef Scot Mangold. Scot Mangold, welcome to Food From Here.
Thank you.
You grew up in Evansville.
I did.
Tell me about growing up in Evansville.
I grew up on the north side, pretty much normal childhood. Went to Mater Dei, did all the normal 80s kid stuff.
Like?
Rode bikes everywhere.
Sure.
Went to the Ross, which might not have been a normal kid stuff, but yeah, just...
What were your earliest aspirations that you can recall?
When I was really young, I thought I'd want to be a lawyer, which to me is crazy to think that now. And then I was going to get into photography, go to photojournalism school at Vincennes, and at the last minute decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to become a hairdresser. So I went to Rogers Academy, and then I cut hair for about 10 years. And during that time, I was playing in different bands. And as the bands progress, I always knew that once I got out, I wanted to get into, go to culinary school, because I was working in different restaurants as a server or back in the house. It got to a point where I was like, okay, I've got to make a change. And so I went to Johnson & Wales in Charleston when I turned 30. And at that point in my life is when I really started learning about food and all that. Beforehand, I didn't know anything. My mom made everything out of a box. It'd be like, banquet fried chicken,
Okay.
Au gratin potatoes. But, everything came out of a box.
Okay. Did you go to restaurants very often when you were growing up?
We would go occasionally, like, to Ponderosa.
Sure.
But that was about it. We didn't have enough money to always go to restaurants, so, we just didn't. Yeah, so some of my, two friends that really opened my eyes. One was Shannon Corrigan. We had, she had an apartment downtown, and we had been out partying or whatever it was we did in the 80s. And
Partying.
Yeah. Went back to her apartment, and she made basically like a mushroom fettuccine Alfredo, but from scratch. And I was just blown away at the simplicity and how good, that tasted.
Yeah. That was a bit of an inspiration for you as well.
Yeah, that kind of got me to thinking, and then so that was one of the things that made me think about food and wanting to go to culinary school. Turned 30, moved to Charleston, and went to school. And I wasn't the oldest there in my class. There was a few in their 50s, but the majority of people were straight out of high school. And to me, even then, not knowing anything, and now looking back, I don't think culinary school is for people out of high school. I think I mean, unless you're taking like culinary classes at EVSC or whatever, just you need that life experience and work experience in a restaurant, because most of these kids, I feel, the parents didn't know what to do with them, so they were like, "Oh, we'll send you to culinary school. That's easy, and you can be like Emeril Lagasse on TV." And
if only.
Once you're in it, especially once you get into a real kitchen, and especially back then when you were still getting screamed at, most people, bolted the first time they got yelled at.
It was a harsher environment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. After culinary school, you've been working as a chef since about 2000, and in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I got out of school. Originally, I thought I was going to go to Europe and do an internship, but I got hired by Chef Paul Albrecht in Panama City Beach, and he was part of Panos and Paul's in Atlanta and the Buckhead Diner Group. And so his thought was, why go to Europe when, he was a European chef, I could just work for him. And, it worked out pretty good,
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I mean, looking back, it was a better experience than I probably thought of at the time. But, he's definitely one of my true culinary mentors. And I think he only recently quit the restaurant business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So did you feel like it was an apprenticeship that he was bringing you into, or kind of taking you under his wing, or he basically just said, "I've got a spot for you, come onto my crew"?
Yeah, it was more that, and it was interesting because in the kitchen, part of it was a group of people from Czech Republic. There was some people from Germany, a lady from Thailand, and then a couple American kids. Not everybody spoke English, but we were able to,
kitchen language.
Yeah, learn, and it was a good time.
Yeah. So you worked, some of those years since between then and now were spent here in Evansville,
Yep.
and others were in other cities around the country. Did you get to Europe?
No.
Okay.
No,
just
not
curious.
to work. Just went there to visit once, but not to work.
Okay. Let's talk about Colorado a little bit, because you seem to spend a chunk of time in Colorado.
Yeah.
It seems to have captured your heart in some way, shape, or form. So maybe we can look at how you got there and what you did.
So I was in Florida, and I'd been there for a year and a half and decided I want to go to Colorado. Wasn't sure if I knew anybody out there. Started applying for jobs, got hired as a sous chef at the Colorado Private Reserve, which was this private club in downtown, or in Cherry Creek area of Denver. It was supposed to be this fully funded, had hundreds of members type private club, but it probably only had like 10.
A little more aspirational than...
But, it had... Denver Nuggets coach Dan Issel at that time I think he was probably one of the big backers. They had horse racing that people could gamble on or whatever. But it was just like one of the nicest. Like when you walked in, you knew everything was top dollar. They had a spa down in the basement. They had like a hot tub that was in a room full of marble. The leather seats, when you sat, like I said, when you sat down, you knew that was not a cheap leather chair.
I think you called it posh.
It was, it was very posh. It was fun. You got to meet a lot of people, cook for a lot of really interesting people, and kind of do what I wanted.
On one of your returns to the Evansville area, you worked for SMG.
Yep, I worked for SMG.
Couple years.
Yeah, which was Roberts Stadium, and at that time it was called the Plaza, doing backstage catering and event catering and all that.
Yeah, that was backstage for performers.
Yep.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you. We hear a lot about hospitality riders. Everybody seems to know the Van Halen brown M&Ms, I guess it was, that they needed removed from there. I heard a story that David Lee Roth said about that particular writer, about that M&M story, that they put that in there to see if the venues were paying attention to the contract, if they were reading the details of the contract. That seems to me like an after-the-fact justification for something that was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
But did you have to deal with writers and things like that when you were doing?
We did, but there was never anything that crazy. Some bands would have, on Monday they get socks. If they're there on a Wednesday, they get underwear, or just so they have clean clothes going through the week.
Okay.
Kid Rock wanted Aveda candles in his room, but for the most part, it was never.
Was it like food?
Yeah, for certain food for the room, or Hank Jr. probably had the biggest bar request. I mean, even if you were an alcoholic, that was a lot of booze. I don't know how you had that every night, but yeah, it was insane. But most of the time it's pretty realistic. A fruit tray or a deli tray in their rooms, no green M&Ms type thing.
One of my colleagues here at the radio station went to a big golf event this past week. I think he said there were something like 40,000 people in attendance, and they were fed. He described it to me. It sounded like basic brown bag type lunches for every attendee. So when you bought your ticket to go to the event, you would get lunch. And he said they went through this big tent and they picked up their sandwiches and their drinks and so forth. He was just really marveling at the coordination and the efficiency of putting on that kind of a spread for your guests. And did you ever do anything, perhaps not 40,000 people, but even a few thousand, even 1,000, even a few hundred for me is a lot. Can you talk about how somebody goes about figuring out how to feed people?
Yeah, we have the Right to Life fundraiser, which is usually at least 3,000 people every year. This past winter, we had a local company that had their company meetings, and that was 700 people for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 days. So, it takes some planning and just scheduling ahead, like, okay, today we're getting this prep done. Tomorrow we'll get this prep done. This day we will cook day one prep, and you just kind of have to map it out.
So it takes some coordination and logistics and ordering and so forth.
Controlled chaos.
I was going to say, I can place myself in that space and just know there's not a whole lot of time to think or decide, because you have to have already decided. Yeah.
Probably the most chaotic time is when you're doing plate up. So when you got to plate 3,000 people's meals, you can't do it too far ahead, but you can't do it at the last minute either. And that's usually probably in the catering world, like the time I stress out the most and hope that nobody is talking and we can just focus and get it done.
Yeah, get those plates filled. How long would that take, say, for that?
Last year when we did it, we had 3 lines, double-sided. And it took us, so each side was doing, the plate would come down, you put your starch, your sauce, your vegetable, your protein, garnish, wipe, lid, and put it in the hot box. So there were 6 sides going to that. It took us 2 hours to get it done.
So you basically set up what sounds like a buffet line in your kitchen where you're plating?
Basically, and everybody has one job. I'm always saying it's factory work. You have one job. That's all you got to do. Put those potatoes same spot every time.
Okay.
And next person, you put that sauce in the same spot every time.
Yeah, that would be very assembly line, but otherwise I don't see how you could do it. One person can't do the whole plate.
No, not for that many people.
Yeah, catering, I was very interested in that because it's different than restaurant work. You assume that there's a lot of overlap, but it really is a kind of, as you said, assembly line work. And yet you have to make things that are delicious.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
When you're making in mass quantities.
Right.
So how do you do that?
Just pre-planning, a lot of pre-planning and a lot of tasting as you're going along until, you get it right.
Are there some things that don't work in that context?
We found out bacon sandwiches with avocados do not work in that context. But other than that, That's really been the only dish that I've ever seen just completely backfire on anybody.
What happened?
Just the avocados turned, the sandwiches fell apart. It was just it was a bad plan from the get-go.
Yeah, you would almost have to have that all served deconstructed on the plate.
Yeah, it probably would have been.
And even then, the avocado might present some problems. Yeah. So you've been in the food industry for almost 25 years now, and longer if you count your early years working in restaurants before you went to school. It can change your experience of eating in a restaurant. A lot of things in life, having kids, can change your experience of eating in a restaurant. But working in a restaurant kitchen can make you look at your food, your experience as a diner, differently.
Yeah, I'm usually, unless it's horrible, I'm not critical, because after working in all of this, there are times when things don't go right. Not because of, not just because of the server, not just because of a line cook, it could be whatever. I might say to myself, either I won't order that again or I won't come back, but I'm not going to be overly critical, again, unless it's just really bad. I'm usually just thankful somebody else is cooking.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah, for sure. Are there certain things that, knowing how people are dealing with the food in the kitchen, are there certain things you look for when your food comes out that tells you somebody's paying attention or, they're not on their game tonight?
If the plates are clean and, everything looks pretty then you know that somebody back there cares. If, there's fingerprints on the edge or it's just messy, it could still taste good, but everybody eats with their eyes first. So, when it comes out and if it looks good right away, then you're instantly hopeful as opposed to, ooh, this looks like slop. And then you take a bite and you're like, oh, for a slop, this is pretty good.
Am I correct that you were the executive chef at the Firefly Grill?
Yeah, when they opened.
Yeah. I was such a fan. And they didn't last for long, but I went there twice while they were open. I had a birthday dinner there, and I just loved it. I like that style, cooking and so forth.
I do too.
Can you talk about that particular project a little bit?
Yeah, it was Josh Armstrong and all of a sudden I'm going to forget his partner's name, or at the time, Scott. I can't remember his name. But Josh had this dream of a Southern-style restaurant. And funny story, I got hired because of I knew Matt Rao and I knew John Campbell. And they thought, wow, if you're friends with that two-stretch of the population, you must be able to get along with people. So that was one of the reasons why I got hired. And basically, it was just executing Josh's dream as best as I could. I love Southern food. I always think I'm going to like something else, but if I'm going to just make something on the fly, or it always ends up coming back to Southern cooking, which, probably because of Charleston and Florida.
Can you describe what Southern cooking is in your mind?
In my mind, it's home cooking. It's not always pretty. It's hearty and uses, a mix of vegetables and, like with Charleston, you had the Creole influences and you had plantation influences, and it's just a good melting pot. To me, that's probably the most melting pot style of cooking in the United States is Southern Eastern cooking.
Yeah, I've heard that said about Louisiana cooking as well, that it's very much a melting pot with several different styles of food all come together.
Yeah.
When I think of Southern food, I think of course grits, things made with corn and gritty corn and lots of gravy. Yeah. And the mixed vegetables, I always remember the mixed vegetables, the lima bean mixes. And
succotash.
Yeah, that's what I think of with Southern. But the Firefly Grill was a little more upscale presentation of that.
Right.
Maybe we can remind people of where that was, because it was quite a few years ago.
Yeah, it was where Bandanas is now.
Over by Lowe's.
Yeah, by Lowe's.
On the east side.
Yeah. In hindsight, that might have been the reason why it didn't make it. I don't know, just because it was a little out of, especially at that time, it wasn't even that developed over there. Mm-hmm. But the food was great. We had crab cakes, we had fried green tomatoes with this corn relish, We had this huge fried chicken breast that was pretty much the size of a plate with the white gravy, and we made Paula Deen, or a take on Paula Deen's donut pudding.
That's like a bread pudding, the donut pudding.
Yeah.
Did you put bourbon with it? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was in the butter.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I might have had that, as I recall.
Probably. I mean, it was definitely one of the
popular things. Yeah, for
like
sure.
when I worked at Poogan's Porch in Charleston, we were kind of doing the same sort of food there. But one of the first things I ever saw that I thought would just be horrible was corn pudding, because it had cream corn in it, and just the sound of those two words sounds horrible. But oh my gosh, that was so good.
Yeah, corn pudding was something that I had never had. I didn't grow up in the South or the Middle South. I grew up with creamed corn, though it was one of my least favorite side vegetables that would appear on my plate when I was a kid. And so my first introduction to corn pudding was like, really, that's what's in it?
Yeah.
But then I ate it, and
it was delicious.
It's so tasty.
Yeah.
Are there any restaurants locally that you can think of that are doing Southern cooking?
So, I have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we just moved back, so we don't go out very often.
This is a question for Brian Buxton, then, I guess, right? Yeah.
But we do, so not Southern cooking, but we love manna and Cafe Ruzu and Toroni's, and my daughter loves Red Lobster. So when she gets to pick, it's either going to be McDonald's or Red Lobster, and we usually try to avoid McDonald's. But we went to Red Lobster last night, and speaking of grits, they had shrimp and grits, and oh my gosh, it was so good.
Really? That's nice to hear. Yeah, apparently our Red Lobster got spared from the downsizing that's going on in the industry.
Yeah.
So
I had heard about it, so I was like, maybe we should go before they...
Yeah, we were spared the chopping block for at least a little bit.
Yeah. I don't even know why it's her favorite. I mean, it's not like she eats anything from there, that you couldn't get anywhere else. But
Do they still have the lobster tank?
Yeah, but there was no lobsters in there last week. And that's all, she always wants to go check out the lobsters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like she's eating seafood or anything.
Right, it's hard to say why kids like what they like. Maybe somebody was nice to them at one point or treated them like that.
Or it just seems fancy to her, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. You have been a private chef. Would you care to talk about what that is like?
I didn't. I tried to start it when I was here in Evansville, and I cooked for a couple families, not necessarily every day, but would make a week's worth of food and take it to them. And then in Colorado, I did some of that, and then I got hired at a hunting lodge, which was, again, very posh. You were never cooking for more than 12 people. I pretty much got to cook whatever I wanted. We had smokers, and so I'd come in the morning. I'd start on lunch. They'd already be out, and then they'd come in, eat lunch. They'd rest, and then they'd head out before sunset. And during that time, I'd be getting dinner ready and prepping breakfast that they could grab in the morning. But it was a lot of fun. I got to anything I wanted to make. They allowed me to make it, and it almost always went over. Occasionally you'd have those people that were like my kids, only eating chicken tenders or something. But for the most part, people, were super appreciative.
Where was this in Colorado?
It was down in Levita, where we lived, which is about 2 hours south of Denver.
Yeah, is it in the mountains just a little bit? Or?
It's at the base of the mountains. So where we lived, we had the Spanish Peaks just directly south of us, and then we had part of the Sangre de Cristos to the west, and then part of the Rocky Mountains came down to the north of us.
Oh, sweet.
So,
nice.
Yeah, it was gorgeous.
I bet. I want to talk about what brought you back to here, but before we go there, maybe we can talk a little bit about Cuchara Valley Pantry that you worked with.
So if you live in that area, nobody has a job for a full year. It's everything's, so you have to come up with side hustles and all that. So I was using different spice blends for whatever in the restaurant, and then decided, well, why don't we start marketing it? And we sold it at different stores in where we lived. But we made steak rub, which was ribeye. It was a ribeye rub. It had coriander, garlic, onion powder, and the salt and pepper. We did that. We made black garlic that we sold to a couple different restaurants up there. We had an old slow cooker, and we'd set it at 120, 121 degrees and then cook it for about 20 days, which was probably my favorite thing that we did. And we made smoked salts. We made, liquid smoke. Mostly we just did it for fun.
Yeah. I have a tiny smoker at home. It's a cylinder, maybe about as big as a 2-liter soda bottle. You can put little wood shavings in it and put whatever you want, be it a little piece of fish or some salt or whatever, and just smoke it with either hickory or mesquite or whatever kind of wood that you want to smoke it with. And it's really fun. This makes it a little teeny tiny, enough for a home kitchen. But it's really fun, and it gives you, it gives you that opportunity to experiment with flavors and just try things. Was this a business that had commercial intentions or aspirations, or was it something that you were kind of doing just to bring in some dollars in the off season?
Yeah, it was just mostly for fun. Had I really focused on it or had somebody that was more business minded than I am, maybe we could have pushed it further. But mostly it was just mostly just for fun.
Yeah. You're working now with Old National Events Plaza.
Yep.
And you've been working with them since you came back, just a year, right?
I came back last year.
Why don't you tell us what brought you back to the Evansville area and how you ended up at the Events Plaza?
So what brought me back was the same thing that made me leave, and that's family. I didn't think I was going to come back from Colorado, but at November of 2022, we all got COVID and realized that our support system, we lived in the middle of nowhere. It was an hour to drive. We put 30,000 miles a year on each car. My wife was a nurse. At that point I was doing real estate. So, I just had, it finally dawned on me that, we need to move back. Much probably to my wife's chagrin, because we had gotten into a huge fight a month before about moving back. Because my dad was getting sick, and she said, we should move back to help, and I was adamantly against ever moving back. And then we all got sick, and it's like, we should move back.
Yeah, and like the universe hit you over the head with that big hammer and said, think about this again.
Yeah. So at that point, I had called around to some connections I had to see if anybody was hiring, and ASM, or Old National Event Plaza, was hiring a sous chef, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'll definitely come, because in theory, I really like the concept of this job. You get to do a little bit of everything. We run concessions, we do pop-up restaurants, we do catering. So it's not always the same thing. You're not stuck in, one thing about restaurants is that you get a menu, and if it's a themed you're not changing the menu.
It is what it is.
Yeah, you're not doing some French dish all of a sudden. You're sticking with, and also this job, gives me time to be with the kids. Because with a restaurant, you're 80 hours a week with a week off a year.
And holidays and weekends and
here, I have stretches of being really busy, but I also have stretches of not being busy and get to, see the kids grow up. And
that's always nice.
Yeah, most of the time.
Talk to me a little bit about that job on a daily basis, or weekly or monthly. What might it feel like or look like?
It depends the time of the year. Right now, it's mostly admin work, getting caught up on paperwork, deep cleaning pieces of equipment, planning out menus down the road. But then once the busy season starts, you might have a concert with backstage catering and concessions. Plus, we do pre-show meals for the Broadway series for ticket holders. And then, it could be a fundraiser or a convention going on, all either at the same time or spread out over the week or the month. So,
right. So really varied.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be serving 15 people and you might be serving 1,500.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a challenge, and it stretches your brain a little bit, right? It keeps you on your toes in the kitchen, which is, you're not going to get bored serving up that same chicken on the beach week after week after week. Yeah. Talk to me about the dinners on the bridge. I love this idea, and I have only recently learned about it, but they've been going on for a little while.
They started before I got here.
First of all, let's explain what they are.
Okay, so the dinner on the bridge is a food pairing. Originally, it was just wine, and then we've done mead. In June, we have a bourbon one, and then in July we're going to do an IPA tasting. We did Snoop Dogg's wines a couple months ago, so we try to not make it just be your normal wine pairing, like just your typical wines. We try to do something different every month, and the price range is anywhere from $60 to $130 a person, depending on what we're doing.
And the bridge that they're held in
is the bridge that connects the DoubleTree and the Ford Center.
Right. So people can see you while you're dining.
Yeah, and you can watch the fire trucks go by us, which happens every time. And it's a 5-course meal that we pair up with whatever it is we're serving.
Yeah, what would one of those meals typically look like?
Of course, I'm not going to remember anything.
Okay, you would start with a...
Yeah, we'll usually do some sort of appetizer, and then either a typical 5-course meal. Maybe it might be 2 or 3 appetizers in a row. It might be appetizer, salad, soup.
Do you remember what you served with the Snoop wines?
We did, the salad was watermelon cubes with fried lobster and balsamic pearls. It was really good. And that is all I can actually remember.
All right, talk to me about balsamic pearls. The first thing that came to mind was something that a chef I pay attention to online complained about balsamic because it turns his salads brown. He doesn't like brown on his salad, so I'm thinking balsamic pearls might be like little brown caviar-looking things.
Yeah, they look like caviar, and we bought it. You can go through the process of making it, which I have not tried.
Okay.
But they're just like these little. They look like caviar and little burst of flavor. Like truffle oil, balsamic vinegars, sherry vinegar, all sorts of different flavors.
Huh. Pearls. That's a new one. How many people attend these dinners?
Anywhere from 16 to 60.
Wow.
Depending on...
that would be a packed bridge.
60
people.
is,
oh my goodness.
60 is the max.
So those happen every month?
Usually once a month.
Throughout the year?
Throughout the year, yeah.
Is it fun?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good way to have a creative output, and you're not doing, typical banquet food.
How big is your staff?
That really depends. We probably have a core group of about 5 people that are going to show up all the time. And then when it comes to our bigger events, I'll probably start next month searching for people like, hey, we got this big 3,000 person event in September.
How many people do you need to staff up for that?
Just a plate, usually 20 people.
Yeah.
On the prep part of it, usually the core group of people is plenty to, like I said, as long as you've thought it through and you've got a plan and you got your big whiteboard and all, your map is up there and you just kind of work through it, generally happens.
Let's talk about your kitchen at home. Do you run your kitchen at home or do you share it, kitchen responsibilities with your spouse? She
has a couple dishes that she makes, but most of the time, I wouldn't say run the kitchen, but most of the time, because she works nights, so I come home and she's usually leaving for work within an hour and a half. So it's kind of get something for the kids they'll eat, get something that we'll eat. It just kind of happens.
What are your kids eating right now?
Well, the 2-year-old, he will eat almost anything. The 6-year-old, you never know. It's, one day it's chicken nuggets, then she loves salami. She'll eat salami all day long. She'll eat grilled cheese all the time, quesadillas with just cheese. She won't touch a vegetable my son, the 2-year-old, he'll sit there and eat a salad nonstop from his mom until the 6-year-old decides she doesn't like it and makes a face, and then monkey see, monkey do.
Oh.
He won't do it. He won't eat it either.
Yeah, they do tend to. I don't want to overgeneralize, but they do tend to go through a cheese phase.
Oh, yeah. Well, when Evelyn was born, this was when we were in Colorado. She was 3 days old, and she was at the restaurant with us every day up until we closed it down. And, she'd be either on my back or my wife's back, or I had a little booster chair on the line while we were working and give her food. And she would eat anything then. But once she got to be...
You said 3 days old.
Yeah. Yeah, she was like this big. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
very tiny little human.
We used to do Friday night supper club during the off season up there. And so, yeah, that was her introduction to the community, was at 3 days old, and our Friday night supper club. It's funny because she's grown up being in the restaurant all the time, and she used to kind of like play chef or whatever, but not so much anymore. But my son, who's never really been in the kitchen, that's all he wants to play, is like pretending like he's cooking food and stuff like that.
Huh. What's in your pantry at home, your fridge?
In our fridge?
Always. What are a couple of things that are always in there?
There's always juices, usually zucchini or onions, and then cheese and deli meat for the kids. We usually always have rotisserie chicken because that's usually something that we can make into something. Either with we'll make a dish that we kind of just happen to make, and now it's one of our favorites, but it's couscous, basil, and the chicken, and maybe a little bit of cream. It's just kind of like a one-pot type meal, and that's usually pretty good. And then we almost always have egg rolls or something in the freezer, and then make fried rice with the chicken. And we usually never have full meal. It's usually like, we're going to eat tomorrow together. I'll run to the store and get something.
No 5-course meals at your house, huh?
Not usually, no.
Do you plan to stay in Evansville?
Yeah, I plan to stay. The last time I moved back, I always joke, I'm staying. The depression hasn't kicked in yet. But no, I don't know. It's just, I think being older and having kids, it's made it a lot better. They have friends now. Where we used to live, it was mostly an older community. The graduating class was always like 11 kids.
Huh, really small. Yeah.
Like the town the school my daughter goes to now is bigger than our town that she grew up in. So no, there's just a lot more to do. Everything, you don't have to drive an hour.
Isn't that funny? Because that's a lot of people's feeling about Evansville, is if they can get to Louisville, which is an hour and a half down the road, if they can even get to Bloomington, there's a lot more to do, and it's only an hour away. Yeah. So it's all perspective, isn't it? Right.
Or, the whole, like, I had to drive to the west side. It took us 15 minutes. And every now and then I'll catch myself saying that, and Lauren, my wife, will be like,
dude.
Yeah. Like,
yeah, Scot Mangold, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me today. Food From Here is sponsored by Swerka and More, whose mission is to enhance opportunities for independent living and improve the quality of life for seniors in southern Indiana. That mission includes an intergenerational community garden partnership with Young and Established to help relieve food insecurity in our community. And that's our show for today. Remember, for our next episode, send me an email and tell me what you're putting on your table this summer. What are you cooking? What are you eating? What are your kids eating? Do you need a summer menu rescue? Let me know. Send the email to foodfromhere@wnin.org with the subject line Summer Food, and I'll include your thoughts and answer any questions you might have next time. Food From Here is produced by Tri-State Media in Evansville, Indiana, home of WNIN-FM and WNIN PBS, with support from Swerka and More, and from lovely people like you. I'm Peggy Pirro. Thanks for listening.